The departures board flipped through its rows above us, each card turning over with a sound like scattered applause. Golden light poured the length of the platform, and the whole station smelled of cold steel and rain. My satchel hung across one shoulder, my navy shirt rolled to the elbow, and I stood facing her the way you face something you're not ready to lose. There was a stillness in her that made the platform go quiet. She held a cream envelope pressed flat against her chest. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I said. She looked at me a long moment. Then, "I guess I can't keep this secret any longer." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the envelope until the knuckles went white. I stopped breathing. "I'm Aaron Doyle, 34. I fix furniture other people have given up on. That's the short version. The one I used to give at parties I no longer go to. The longer version is that I run a small shop on a side street in Richmond, Virginia, with my name painted on the window in gold letters that have started to flake at the corners. Doyle Restoration. I signed the lease 6 years ago with money I'd saved and money I'd borrowed, and I've spent every day since bent over other people's broken things, coaxing them back toward what they used to be. I live in the apartment above the shop. It's one room and a kitchen and a window that looks down on the street. Most nights, the last thing I hear before sleep is the radiator ticking, and the last thing I smell is whatever I was working on that day. Linseed oil, beeswax, sawdust fine as flour. I learned the trade the slow way, starting at 19 as an apprentice at a place called Harmon & Sons, sweeping floors for a year before they let me near a chisel. I've been doing this half my life now, and I still think there is nothing better than the moment a dead finish comes back under a rag, the grain waking up like something remembering it was once alive. The truth is I'm good at this and not much else. Give me a cracked veneer or a joint gone loose with a century of winters, and I know exactly what it needs. Give me a marriage coming apart in slow motion, and I stood there with my hands open, useless, watching it go. Wood, I understand. Wood tells you what's wrong with it if you're patient. People never learned that trick. It's a quiet life. I know how that sounds. For a long time I told myself quiet was the same as peaceful, and mostly I believed it. I was married once. We're 2 years divorced now, no children. Nothing shared except a condo across town that neither of us lived in, and neither of us could seem to sell. Her name was Vanessa. She wanted things I couldn't give her. And I don't mean that the way it sounds, like I was noble and she was greedy. I mean, she wanted a bigger life, a louder one, and she thought that, if I loved her enough, I'd trade the shop for something that paid better and sounded better at dinner. Sell the workshop? Aaron, she used to say. It's a hobby, not a future. Toward the end, she stopped saying it like a suggestion and started saying it like a verdict. She left. I kept the shop. For a while, that felt like winning. But a workshop is a business, and a business has to eat. That autumn there was an envelope taped to my own front door. A rent increase, the 3rd in 4 years, more than I could carry with the way the work had thinned. People don't restore things the way they used to. They replace them. It's cheaper to buy new than to fix old, and I had watched the calls grow fewer and the weeks between them grow longer, until the math stopped being a worry and started being a wall I couldn't see over. So when the letter came from the museum in Charleston, a house museum, a real collection, a salaried position restoring furniture 200 years older than anything I had ever touched, I read it standing at my bench in the golden light of late afternoon. I set it down on the walnut top and I let myself feel, for the first time in a long time, like the door in front of me might actually open. Steady pay. Real work. A city where nobody knew my name, or my ex-wife's, or the particular sound a marriage makes when it finally gives way. I told myself it was the smart thing. I told myself it was the brave thing. I hadn't signed anything yet, but somewhere behind my ribs I'd already started packing. The bell over the shop door would ring and I'd look up expecting a customer, and it would only be the wind pushing it. That's how slow it had gotten. That's how ready I thought I was to go. I thought leaving was the hardest decision I'd make that autumn. I was wrong about which decision mattered. She came in on a Tuesday, near closing, with the low sun throwing long gold bars across the floor. The bell rang, and I looked up, and this time it wasn't the wind. She was helping a delivery man ease something through the door, one hand steadying it, the other flat against the frame, and there was a stillness in the way she moved that made me set down my rag without meaning to. Between them they carried in a writing desk. Walnut, small, the kind they don't build anymore, with a fall front and slim tapered legs and a row of little drawers behind the writing surface. Even under decades of grime and a finish gone the color of weak tea, I could see the bones of it were good. Somebody had loved it once, and then somebody had stopped, and time had done the rest. "They told me you were the person for this," she said. "It was my grandmother's. I'd like it brought back. Grace," she added, when I didn't move. "Grace Ellison." I ran my hand along the top and felt the old shellac lift under my thumbnail, and I said what I always say, that it would take time, that I don't rush this kind of work, that she should be patient. She smiled a little at the word patient, like it was a private joke, and said that was fine, that she'd gotten good at waiting. I almost knew her. That's the strange part I keep coming back to. There was a familiarity to her face, like a word on the tip of the tongue, and I turned it over while I wrote up the ticket and couldn't land it. "Have we," I said finally, "restored something for you before?" She looked at the desk instead of at me. A small nod, barely there, and then she changed the subject to the weather, and I let her. Because a customer's business is their own, and I was already thinking about which solvent would be gentle enough for the fall front. I told her a week for the estimate. She came back in 2 days, and then she kept coming back. That's the thing I didn't understand at the time. The work on that desk should have been a handful of appointments, drop off, estimate, pick up. Instead, she started coming by after her shifts at the public library downtown, where she cataloged old records and older paper, and she would settle into the chair in the corner by the window and just watch me work. Not hovering, not talking much. She'd bring 2 coffees, set one on the bench beside me without a word, and take the other back to her corner, while I lifted the ruined finish off her grandmother's desk, one careful stroke at a time. We fell into a rhythm without either of us naming it. I'd be at the bench when the bell rang around 6, and after a while I stopped even looking up. I'd just say the door's open, and she'd come in and hang her coat and take the corner chair like it had her name on it. Some evenings we barely spoke. She'd read or watch, and I'd work, and the only sounds were the scrape of the cabinet scraper and the traffic hissing by on the wet street outside. It should have felt like being watched. It felt like being kept company. There's a difference, and somewhere in the last few years I'd forgotten it. I should have found it odd. I think part of me did, but the shop had been so silent for so long that having another person breathing in it, another cup steaming on the sill, felt less like a mystery to solve than a thing I hadn't known I missed. So I let her stay. I told myself she just liked the smell of the place, the vinegar and the brass polish, the beeswax I warmed in a tin on the hot plate. Looking back, there were signs everywhere. I just didn't have the eyes for them yet. There was the envelope. For one, cream-colored, soft at the corners the way paper gets when it's been carried a long time. It rode in the outside pocket of her bag, and I noticed, without letting myself notice, that she always knew where it was. Her hand would drift to it when she thought I wasn't looking, press it flat, and go still. I assumed it was a letter she needed to mail and kept forgetting. I never once, in all those weeks, asked her what it was. I've thought about that a great deal since. Once, reaching past her bag for a rag, my hand brushed the outside pocket, and she moved the bag quick and light to her other side, the way you'd move a sleeping cat without a word. I apologized. She said it was nothing. I believed her, because believing people came easy to me then, and because I had no reason in the world to think a soft old envelope mattered more than the desk we were both pretending I was only there to fix. I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone, how Vanessa used to fill a car with talk on a 3-hour drive and call the quiet spells my sulking, How I'd learned to stop leaving gaps in a conversation because she'd only rush to fill them. Grace left gaps everywhere. She'd ask a question and then actually wait, and the waiting was so unfamiliar that the first few times I thought I'd misheard her. With her, silence wasn't a thing you lost an argument in. It was just a room the two of us could stand in, and there was the desk itself. As I worked, I found the little quirks old furniture keeps like secrets. Behind the bank of small drawers there was a hidden one, a shallow compartment you reached by pressing a spring catch under the writing surface. I found it by accident, the way you find these things, and I slid it open to check it was empty before I cleaned it. Her hand came down flat on the desk. Not hard, just quick. "Leave that one," she said. "It doesn't need anything." I looked up. For half a second, something moved across her face, and then it was gone, folded away, and she was asking me about the coffee getting cold. So I closed the little drawer and I left it, because she asked me to, and I filed it under the harmless mysteries of strangers. I remember thinking, that's an odd thing, to guard an empty drawer, but people keep sentiment in strange corners, and it was her grandmother's desk, and I figured there was a memory living in that compartment that she didn't want my rags near. I was right, in a way. I just had the memory pointed backward. I thought it belonged to her grandmother. It belonged to me, and I didn't know how much of it was really about me yet. She was so unlike the noise I'd grown used to. That's what I kept thinking. My marriage had been loud even when it was good, Vanessa filling every silence, narrating every room, wanting and wanting out loud. Grace wanted nothing out loud. She asked for nothing, took up no space she wasn't offered, and still, somehow, the shop felt more full with her in it than it had felt in years. "Some things are worth doing slowly," she said once, watching me raise the grain back to life on the fall front. "That's a strange thing to say about a table," I told her. She just smiled at her coffee. "It's a desk," she said. I laughed and went back to work and thought nothing of it. I want to tell that version of myself to put down the rag. To look up, to ask the woman in the corner, plainly, why a repair that should have taken 3 visits was somehow keeping her in my shop 3 evenings a week, but you can't warn the man you used to be. You can only tell the story straight and let other people flinch where you didn't. She never rushed the work. Later, I understood she wasn't waiting on the desk. She was waiting on me. And the whole time, in the pocket of her bag, 8 inches from my elbow, the answer sat sealed in an envelope I never thought to open. Vanessa came back on a gray afternoon in October, and I heard her before I saw her. Her heels rang on the concrete floor like she owned the sound of the room, and the whole shop, which smelled of walnut and warm wax, filled up all at once with her perfume. 2 years apart, and she still walked into my shop like she was appraising it for resale. She looked at the flaking gold letters on the window, the cold hot plate, the single chair in the corner, and I watched her add it all up and land on the same figure she always had. Not enough. She set a folder down on my bench, right on top of the piece I was working on, which told me everything about why she'd come before she said a word. The condo. A buyer, finally, after 2 years of it sitting empty and expensive between us. She needed my signature to close, and she'd driven across town to get it in person, because Vanessa never trusted a thing to happen unless she was standing over it while it did. "You could at least look happy," she said. "This gets us both free." I was reaching for a pen when she noticed the chair in the corner. Grace had come in a few minutes earlier and gone quiet the moment the heels hit the floor, the way a room goes quiet when the weather turns. Vanessa's eyes moved over her, narrowed, and then something clicked behind them that I didn't like at all. "I know you," Vanessa said slowly. "You're the girl. From way back. The one who was always hanging around Aaron at that shop, before we got married. Ellison, right?" She said it like she'd solved something. "God, you were always there, standing off to the side, watching him." Grace didn't answer. Her hand moved, without her deciding it, to the pocket of her bag, pressed flat against the envelope, and went still. Vanessa saw it. Vanessa saw everything that could be used. She turned to me with a smile I remembered too well, the one that meant she was about to be helpful in the way that costs you something. "Aaron," she said, "come on, you have to see it." She didn't wander back in here after 8 years for a table. She's been circling you the whole time. That envelope she's been guarding since I walked in? Ask her what's really in it. Go on. Ask her. I want to tell you I laughed it off. I didn't. Because here's the thing about a truth used as a weapon. It works best when it's partly true. I had noticed the envelope. I had noticed the desk was taking longer than any desk should. I had noticed the way she watched me, and the way I'd started looking up whenever the bell rang, hoping. Vanessa hadn't invented any of that. She'd simply gathered up things I already half knew and arranged them into the ugliest possible shape, then held the shape up to the light and said, "Look, that's the cruelty of it." She wasn't lying. If she'd lied, I could have swatted it away. Instead, she took a handful of true things. The envelope, the lingering, the long, slow repair. And she strung them into a shape that fit the meanest corner of my own head, the corner that had spent 2 years believing nobody stays without an angle. She knew that corner. She'd helped build it. Vanessa always knew how to hand you a truth like it was a knife, blade first. She has a name, I said. It was all I could manage. I'm sure she does. Vanessa capped her performance with a little shrug. I'm just saying, people don't come back for furniture. You always did want to believe the gentlest story about everybody. It's why you're still fixing chairs in a shop you can't afford instead of living an actual life. She slid the folder toward me. Sign. And think about who's actually looking out for you here. I signed. My hand was steady on the pen and nowhere else. The worst part wasn't Vanessa. I knew Vanessa. I knew the shape of her cruelty the way you know a stair that creaks. The worst part was Grace, in the corner, not defending herself. Not saying, "That's insane," not saying, "How dare you," not laughing the way an innocent person laughs. She just sat there very still with her hand over that envelope, and when I looked at her, hoping she'd give me something to push back against, she looked away. To me, in that moment, looking away was an answer. I keep coming back to it, the way you press a bruise. If Grace had met my eyes, just once, and said it isn't true, I think I'd have believed her over Vanessa in a heartbeat. But she looked at the floor, and her hand went to that envelope, and every alarm Vanessa had just set ringing in my head found something to ring against. Silence, from the one person whose silences I'd started to trust, sounded exactly like a confession, and Vanessa knew it would. That was the terrible economy of her. She'd been married to me long enough to know I read quiet as an answer, that I'd take a person's stillness for a verdict, and she aimed all of it straight at the one woman who couldn't defend herself with noise. She didn't need to prove a single thing. She just needed to leave me alone in a room with my own worst habit and let it do the rest. Vanessa gathered her folder and her perfume and her heels and left, satisfied, the way she always was, after she'd rearranged a room to suit herself. The bell rang behind her, and then it was just the two of us and the walnut desk between us, and a silence that had gone from comfortable to unbearable in the space of 5 minutes. "Aaron," Grace started. "It's late," I said. I didn't shout. I want that on the record, because it'd be a cleaner story if there were some fight to point to. I just gripped the edge of the workbench until the wood bit into my palms, and I kept my eyes on the grain, and I let the quiet do the thing shouting couldn't. I built a wall out of nothing at all, just stillness and a turned shoulder, and I watched her understand that I'd built it. She stood a moment like she might say the whole thing right then. Her hand went to the envelope. It stayed there. And then she gathered her bag and left too, more quietly than Vanessa, which somehow was worse. I sat down at the bench after they'd both gone and put my head in my hands and stayed like that until the light outside went from gray to black. The signed folder sat where Vanessa left it. The cold coffee sat where Grace left it. I threw neither of them out. I just sat between the two things and let the meanest version of the story write itself, because it asked so little of me. Believing she'd used me only required me to feel foolish. Believing she'd loved me would have required me to do something about it. The fluorescent light over the bench flickered the way it had for months, that little stutter I kept meaning to fix. I told myself Vanessa had done me a favor. I almost believed it. That was always my particular talent, believing the story that let me stop feeling things. I called her the next morning, because I am not, in the end, a man who can leave a thing broken without at least looking at how it broke. She came in that afternoon. The desk stood, finished between us, or nearly, the walnut glowing under its new finish like something lit from inside, and we stood on opposite sides of it the way you stand across a table when you already know the conversation is going to cost you. "I need you to tell me the truth," I said. "Vanessa's cruel, but she's not stupid. Was any of it real? Did you come here for the desk, or did you come here for me?" Grace was quiet a long time. I've learned since that her silences were never empty. They were her deciding how much truth a moment could hold. But I didn't know that yet, and her quiet felt like guilt. I wanted her to fight. That's an ugly thing to admit. I wanted her indignant, wanted her to give me a reason to be wrong about her. Because being wrong about her was the only door left that led anywhere good. But Grace didn't fight for herself. She never had. She'd spent 8 years not fighting for herself, and I was about to punish her for the very restraint that should have told me everything. "Yes," she said finally. The desk was partly an excuse. I felt something drop in my chest. "I chose your shop," she went on, and her voice was steady, which cost her. I could see it cost her. "There are a dozen places in this city that could have taken this desk. I drove past 3 of them to get here. I always knew where you were, Aaron. I've always known where you were." She stopped there. That was the door she couldn't walk through. She'd given me the hardest, most damning half of it, the half that made me look like a fool who'd let a stranger sit in his corner for weeks. And she stood there with the rest of it, the half that would have changed everything, and she couldn't make her mouth form it. Her hand went to the envelope in her bag. Her fingers closed on it, and then she took her hand away empty and folded it with the other in front of her, and she said nothing more. I heard Vanessa's voice in my head. "She's been circling you the whole time," and here was Grace confirming the circle, admitting the excuse, going quiet at exactly the moment an honest person would keep talking, and I did the thing I always do. I believed the story that hurt least to believe. Not that a woman had loved me so long and so quietly she couldn't say it out loud. That never crossed my mind. The story I reached for was simpler and meaner, that Vanessa was right, that I'd been managed, that whatever this was, it was built on something withheld. "So, it was never about the table," I said. "It was always about the table." She looked up at me then, and something in her face was pleading with me to be smarter than I was being. And it was never only about the table. I didn't understand it. I heard it as a riddle, a way of not answering, when it was the truest thing she'd said to me. It was always about the desk, because she'd carried the desk and the letter written on it for 8 years. It was never only about the desk, because underneath the desk was the whole of her heart. I had the answer in my ears, and I filed it under evasion. "The Charleston job starts the 1st of November, I said. "I've decided. I'm taking it. I'm leaving Richmond." I watched it land. She didn't argue. That was the thing about Grace. She never once tried to talk me out of anything. Never grabbed, never begged. She just took the blow standing up. "When?" she asked. "Soon. The desk's done. You can take it whenever you want." She came the following week to collect it, 2 days before I was set to leave. The movers waited outside while she looked at the finished desk for a long moment, running one hand along the fall front the way I'd seen her do the first day, and I thought about all the evenings that had somehow filled the space between then and now. Neither of us sat down. You don't sit for the last version of a conversation. We stood at opposite ends of that desk like it was a table set for a meal nobody was going to eat, and the finished walnut threw the overhead light back up at both our faces and I have never in my life wanted so badly to be told I was wrong about something. I pushed the final invoice across the writing surface toward her. I remember the weight of the pen when I'd filled it out that morning, how I'd pressed too hard and torn the top copy and had to start again. She reached into her bag and drew out the envelope, the cream one, soft at the corners, and she set it down on the desk between us and slid it toward me the way I'd slid the invoice toward her. Her fingers rested on it. For 1 second, the whole thing hung there, everything, right on the surface of her grandmother's desk. And then she drew her hand back. Empty. She left the invoice, paid, took her desk, and did not leave the letter. The little brass lock on the hidden drawer clicked shut as the movers tilted it, a small, final sound, and I stood in my emptying shop and told myself I'd done the clean thing, the smart thing. I mistook her honesty for guilt, and it's the kind of mistake you only understand after the train has already started boarding. Which brings me back to the station. The evening before I left, I went down to Main Street Station to sort out the last of it. The ticket, the crate with my tools going ahead of me to Charleston. The great arched hall was half in shadow and half in that late gold light. The departures board flipping through its rows over my head, and I was standing on the platform with my satchel on my shoulder when I heard footsteps stop behind me. I turned around, and it was her. I don't know how she knew I'd be there. Maybe she'd called the shop. Maybe she'd simply known where I was, the way she'd always known where I was. There was that stillness in her again, the one that made the whole loud station go quiet, and she stood a few feet away with the cream envelope pressed flat against her chest. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I said. The same 3 words I'd been saying to everyone for weeks. They came out smaller here. She looked at me a long moment. "Then I guess I can't keep this secret any longer." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the envelope until the knuckles went white, and then she crossed the space between us and held it out to me, and this time her hand did not pull back. "I wrote this 8 years ago," she said, "at my grandmother's desk, the one you just fixed. I was 22, and I was going to give it to you, and then I heard you'd gotten engaged, and I put it in my pocket instead." Her voice stayed level, but it was the level of someone walking a narrow beam. "I've carried it to 3 cities since. Atlanta. Then 2 more. I couldn't take it to a 4th. I couldn't leave Richmond again with it still sealed." I took the envelope. The paper was worn to cloth at the folds. I opened it there on the platform, under the flipping board, and I read what a young woman had written to me 8 years before, in careful, unhurried handwriting, at a desk she would one day carry back into my life, just to have a reason to sit in my corner. I won't tell you every word. Some things stay between a man and a letter, but I'll tell you there wasn't one line of strategy in it. Not one calculated thing. It was just plain and patient and true, a young woman saying she loved the quiet way I worked and the careful way I treated broken things, saying she hoped someday I might treat her that gently, saying she would wait until I was ready, and understanding that ready might never come. She'd written it before Vanessa, before the marriage, before all of it. She had loved me first, and longest, and she'd never once made it my problem. I read it twice, the second time slower, my thumb moving under the lines the way it moves under a grain I'm trying to understand. 8 years. She had felt this at 22 and folded it up and let me go marry someone else and never sent a word to spoil it. Who does that? Who loves like that and stays so quiet you could stand 8 inches from it for 2 months and mistake it for a customer who liked the smell of the place? Everything Vanessa had built came apart in my hands right there. Circling you, managing you. It doesn't take 8 years and 3 cities and a sealed envelope to manage a man. It takes 8 years and 3 cities to love one and never ask for anything back. I looked up from the letter. The board flipped. A train I was no longer going to be on was called over the speakers, the announcement echoing up into the arched ceiling and coming apart. "You could have handed me this at the shop," I said. "Any of those evenings, you could have just given it to me." "I know. Why the station? Why wait until the night before?" She almost smiled. "I needed you to be leaving," she said. "So you'd know I wasn't asking you to stay. So you'd know that whatever you did with it, I'd already made my peace. I didn't want you to choose me because I was in front of you. I wanted you to choose, period." I set the satchel down on the platform. I remember the sound it made, the small, solid thump of a decision. I didn't make a speech. I'm not built for speeches. I just picked up her hand, the one that had guarded that envelope across 3 cities and 8 autumns, and I held it, and we stood there together under the departures board while the train I'd booked pulled out without me. Neither of us said much. We just stood very still and let the station empty around us. And for the first time in years, the quiet felt exactly like what I'd always pretended it was. Peaceful. I never went to Charleston. The autumn after, 1 year on, almost to the day, that walnut writing desk sits in the front room of the little house we share now, angled into the window where the morning light comes in. I still run the shop. It's small, and it's mostly enough, and some months it isn't, and we figure it out. Grace still catalogs old paper at the library and comes home smelling faintly of it. We're not a dramatic couple. That's the part I like best. There's no grand story to tell at dinner, nothing loud, just a man who fixes old things and a woman who keeps old paper and a house that smells of coffee and beeswax and, faintly, of the library. We argue about small things and forgive them small. She still leaves gaps in conversations. I've finally learned to stand in them instead of rushing to fill them up. The letter isn't sealed anymore. It lives open in the hidden drawer of the desk now, the shallow one she once put her hand over and told me to leave alone. I understand that part now. She wasn't hiding anything in there. She'd kept it empty on purpose, saving the space, waiting for the day the letter would finally have somewhere to come home to. Sometimes I catch her with the little spring catch under her thumb, sliding the drawer open just to see the paper is still there, and sliding it shut again. The brass runs smooth now. I fixed it. It doesn't stick anymore. Most mornings I make the coffee and carry a cup to her corner and set it down beside her without a word, the way she used to do for me, back when I thought she was only a quiet customer who liked the smell of beeswax. The light comes across the grain of that old desk and wakes it up, and I think about how close I came to walking past all of it with a ticket in my pocket. I've had a year to sit with how close it was. The loudest person I ever loved handed me the truth like a knife, blade first, and dressed her cruelty up as looking out for me. The quietest person I've ever known held the truth for 8 years and 3 cities, sealed in an envelope, not to trick me, but because she'd rather carry it forever than hand me something I hadn't asked to hold. That's the whole difference, I think. Some people give you the truth to cut you. Some people keep it to spare you. It took me almost losing her to learn to tell the two apart. I'd spent my whole life restoring things other people gave up on, and I nearly gave up on the one person who never gave up on me. That irony sits in my front room every morning, catching the light. One cream envelope, soft at the corners, carried across 3 cities and 8 autumns, waiting for exactly 1 day to be read. I bought a ticket to leave that city. She handed me a reason to stay, and it had been folded inside her coat the whole time, closer than I ever thought to look. If there's a person in your life who loves you quietly, who shows up and asks for nothing and just sets the coffee down beside you, don't wait for the platform. Don't make them carry it to a 4th city. Look up from the work. Ask what's in the envelope. So let me ask you 2 things, and I really do want to know. If you had carried a letter for 8 years, across 3 cities, would you ever have found the courage to hand it over? And have you ever almost left, the day before the one thing you needed most finally arrived? If this one reached you, leave a like, and subscribe if you want more stories like it. And tell me in the comments, would you have opened the letter or the train door?